Oh, good morning and welcome everyone to the last of our Lunch and Learn series for 2015-2016. I'm Brother David Paulang. I work with the Benedictine Institute along with Chick Hardy, who's grabbing a little lunch. We're going to start just so that we give Martin Connell as much time as possible. Before I introduce him, I just want to note that the walking tours that Martin is going to lead as a sort of follow-up to what he's about to show us today, the two on April 14th and April 19th are full. If you want to get on the waiting list for one of those two dates, feel free to email Chuck and Chick and get on the a new nickname. It's a new nickname. Hey, Chuck. There are, however, some spots remaining for Wednesday, April 20th, and that time frame, that time frame is 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, April 20th. If you want to join that walking tour, there's some spots still available. Chick is the one to contact about that. On that walking tour, just to give you a heads up, we're going to be providing the participants with a special paper and crayon for making rubbings of some of what he's about to show you. So you get to, it's a little interactive and you get to take something with you. Okay. Martin Connell was born where the country was born, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was baptized and went to school there, where he attended Villanova. Whoa. I didn't ask you if you played basketball. But I was not on the team. He studied religious studies there. And he continued his studies in theology at the University of Notre Dame, and then moved further north here to Minnesota, where he's been for 18 years. If you do your math, this means he moved here when Jesse Ventura was running for governor. He still moved here. Martin teaches at the two age extremes on our campus. To first-year undergraduates, he teaches a year-long writing seminar on God and politics. And at the other end, in the School of Theology and Seminary, he teaches 3 regular subjects: baptism, the Word of God in the liturgical year, and history and sources of Christian worship. He loves the beautiful campus where we work. He spent some of his sabbatical time, in fact, looking more carefully at where we live and work. And he's about to present some of the fruits of that research to you today. But he also loves to write, bike, and knit, all of which he does to an unhealthy degree. Please help me welcome Martin Connell. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I know some of you from being my students, I know some of you as colleagues, and I know some of you just around campus, and so I'm thrilled that you're here. You may sometimes see me walking around campus when my students are starting to fall asleep in class. I often make them get up and take them on tours of the campus. And I usually do it to punctuate theology, but sometimes I do it just to keep them awake when things, especially with my first-year students, are getting a little too sedate. So it's the fruit of those walking tours. Often when I'm doing them, the student campus guides who take parents and prospective students around say, hey, will you write those up? We would love to know the Greek and the Latin and the inscriptions and the meaning of Benedict and so on. Will you write those up? And so fortunately, I had a sabbatical 2 years ago in 2013-14. And during that time, I started writing up the fruits of those tours, and that's what I'll be presenting today. I would ask you, please, if I'm skipping steps logically, or I say something that's confusing, please just throw your hand up. I'd be happy to stop and help you get on board with where I am. I am lucky. I've never been in a non-Catholic school from kindergarten until my 4 college degrees. I've always been in Catholic schools. I mentioned that because David Paul mentioned about Villanova. I never saw a Villanova basketball game, but fortunately, I was there in 1985 when they won the basketball championship then. And then I went to Notre Dame in 1988 when they won the national championship. And so my education has been a fruit of all the scholarship money that has come from the basketball and the football and so on. So even though it was only in the newspaper today that I found out that they'd won, Villanova that is, it still has been wonderful to be in Catholic schools and Catholic schools that are winning the games that provided scholarship money. So please, whether you're Roman Catholic, non-Catholic, Christian of any type, non-believer, atheist, whatever you might be, please, if I say anything that is disorienting, please just put up your hand. I'm happy to kind of add a little bit to what I might be saying. Right? Just make sure, yeah. So this, David Paul took this picture, and so it's actually a very odd, I often make my students, there's a stairway in the Great Hall, right here, a cement stairway, you can see the side of it. And this block, which will come up in part of what I'm speaking about today, is a big piece of the architecture of the new building. It happens to be on the flip side of the cornerstone that's on the outside of the church. And so we'll see some of that. But before I move away from this beautiful picture that David Paul took, I just want you to see where that stone is located, because the next time you'll see it, it will be by itself. Okay. So to start with the Great Hall on the outside. So there are two major St. John's in our tradition. The one that you might be more familiar with is St. John the Evangelist. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's the one that most of us know because of the Bible, but the St. John after which our university is named is St. John the Baptist. And this is somewhat visible on the outside, but if you're going into the Great Hall, if you haven't seen it, it's down to the right. And part of what the Institute has done for me is I took this, I asked if they would get the paper, and Chick did this. These are for when you want to go up against a cemetery, a tombstone, and you want to get your name on it. So this is actually, so fortunately, it's more visible here. The saint, this is S for saint, and Johannes is the Latin word for John, and the B is just the abbreviation for Baptist, right? So St. John the Baptist. So when you're in the, as you're approaching the Great Hall, this is down to the right. And I don't think Tracy Burr is here, but the other day when I was actually making my little rubbing on the outside, she heard me scraping on the brick outside of her office. And so she came out and she wanted to know who was rubbing against the building on the outside. And so this is actually just on the other side of the wall where Tracy's office is. Okay. On the other side, there's actually something that the rubbing, only the rubbing made me realize was there. So that St. John the Baptist is on the right side of the door, and then on the left side is the date when the building was begun, in 1879. So you see the 18, then the cross, and the 79, but you can barely see within the cross, and that's why the rubbing really helps here. If you can see within the cross, there are these, I think it's kind of like Da Vinci Code theology. I'm not so crazy about that. But when you do the little rubbing, these initials appear. And so I put the initials up here so that you could see. It was only because Chick had provided me with the charcoal and the cemetery paper that I realized that it was there. But in the vertical, you can see the vertical crossbeam. The letters that are there, and they're more visible here, are CSSML. And it's the abbreviated letters for crooks, which means cross, sacre crux, Holy Cross. May the Holy Cross be my light, is the inscription. I like that that one also goes vertical because it reaches from where we are to heavenward. And so it's kind of the positive theology. The other direction is not so positive. So it's NDSMD, okay? And it's non means not. The dragon, which is a metaphor for Satan. May Satan not be my leader. So if you know Mussolini was called Il Duce, that's the Latin origins of the leader. Okay, so I like that the heavenward vertical goes this way, and perhaps we could think that sin, which impedes us from getting to heaven, is the horizontal beam. And so it's under the influence of, say, sinfulness or under the influence of the devil, however you think of it in your own experience or your own theology, that cross kind of has the two poles of human life, the pull from heaven and the impediments to that from the dragon. Yes, please.
So those are expressed with acronyms, the abbreviated letters. Are those common Latin expressions?
Well, actually they are, and one thing, I'll pass these around in response to your question. I have that medal, that St. Benedict medal. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I have two of them. One's very heavy, so I don't keep it around my neck just so I can stand upright. But if you look on the crosses here, those very inscriptions are on the St. Benedict medal. And so, so they are common. I have to say that because I had never been to a Benedictine school before, I wasn't familiar with them until I came to St. John's and saw them here. There's a clearer, I'll start passing the medals around, if you already have, this one I wear all the time, the one with the color on it, and then there's another one here. The letters here are actually also here on this is on the music building, so those same letters, now there are other abbreviations here. When we do the walking tour, I will cover some of this a little bit more, but you can see the same inscription is on that, it's called a tympanum or a pediment above the door of the music building. The C, cross, may the holy cross be my light, looks, and may the devil not be my leader is the other. So they are common, but I didn't know them until I came to a Benedictine school. Okay? So I just the next two were just to focus on the CSSML and then the NDSMD. Okay, and because the middle letter, the S, is common to them both, that's why it works on the cross to have the two pieces intersecting in the middle. And this is just a kind of cartoon image of what's on the medal that I'm passing around. But these were very popular. The 1400th anniversary of the birth of St. Benedict was in 1880, which would have been when the church was being built and decorated. And so this medal was very popular when the foundation stone was being set. And so I think it's because not just the 1400th anniversary, but because we were bringing Benedictine life to Minnesota, the Benedictine medal was coincident with the building of the church. Any other? Okay, so I love this. This is the Great Hall when it was a church, right? And it was before the beautiful painting that we have, which was done by a brother in the Abbey. Clement Krischoff was his name. He did that in 1933. So I have this as about 1888. So it would have been, the building, as you saw, was 1879. And so this would have been after the building was erected, but when it started to accumulate decorations, but before 1933, when the monk did the murals. Okay, it's quite crowded, as you can see, compared to what we see today. All right, the pews were added after this, but you could see a lot of the decorations, and the altar was right now where we have at the top of the steps. And this is a baldacchino. If you've ever been to the Basilica in Minneapolis, they have a similar baldacchino, which is the place for the king. The basilica shape of the Great Hall, or of the first Abbey church, is the word basilica means the place for the king. And so that baldacchino is the place where the king would have sat during the Roman Empire, before Christianity. Okay. So that you can get a sense of the theology of the space there. Okay. So this is the same altar, but now you can see it's after 1933. I just actually found this information on the painter just yesterday. So he was born in Austria, came to the United States not long before he did the mural, 1931, and then came to the Abbey, and he died in 1944. Okay. Now this is the close-up of that, and I just want you to appreciate two main things about it. Is that on the left side, even though the text within the booklet is Latin, and it's Latin from St. John, not John the Baptist, but John the Gospel writer, and it means, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So the translations here ego is kind of a, you could talk about somebody who's egotistically, they're always talking about themselves, so that's the same word in Latin. Okay? Different than that, however, is the letters at Jesus' right hand and his left hand are actually Greek letters. It's the first and last letter of the word Jesus on the left. There's no J in Greek. And so it's the I and the S are the J and the, the I and the C are the J and the S in abbreviated form. Okay? That little symbol over them, that little hop skip over it, means that instead of having the first avenue where you would just have the first part of the word be the abbreviation, this means you're taking the end and the beginning and you're putting them together. And the same with the word Christ, which the word is Christos in Greek, and the X is the CH, and the C is the S at the end of the words Jesus and Christos, the Greek words for Jesus Christ. Okay? Oh, this is just a close-up of the text. Okay, so it's in the Gospel of John, chapter 14, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay. I mention this because our church was built in 1879. The mural wasn't done until 1933, but this is an ancient church of Ravenna in northern Italy. And this text, I am the way, the truth, and the life, has been a church decoration for millennia. This would be more than 1,000 years old. And I also, as I was looking for other examples of this is the Basilica in Budapest, and that's the same phrase, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So it's because it comes from the Gospels, it would be very common, but it's also very common in church decorations in various places in Europe, and perhaps in the United States, although I don't see it as often. Okay. This is when you think about the quad, now we see the quad is kind of part of the campus, whereas it was almost the whole of the campus. So this view that I found in a history book, it was actually in an Abbey periodical called Scriptorium, published in, I think it was in 1930, about 1930. There was an edition that had this picture in it. The resolution isn't so good, but what I wanted you to see is the steeples that used to be in the quad, right? So now they're cut just above those, the kind of roof, but before they reached way up into the sky, and they would have been as visible, and maybe even more visible, than the bell tower that we have now that you can see as you come off of 94. Okay, so it's kind of a good way to see how both the campus and the Abbey were circumscribed at that time. Okay, so now today, I just want to give a little context for the building of the Abbey Church in 1958. Okay, so just to kind of speak about what was happening in the United States, in Europe, and then also in Minnesota. So one is that I'm 55 years old. Maybe I should have said that in the beginning. I was baptized before Vatican II, so I would have been baptized when the rituals were in Latin. I got my first communion in 1967, and the rituals were kind of between Latin and English, and then I was confirmed a year or two later, probably in English. I don't remember any of them, even the one that I got. We used to be confirmed in the 3rd grade back then. Some of you may or may not remember that. But before Vatican II, which happened between 1962 and 1965, relations between Catholics and Protestants were terrible, right? The Catholics, it was a sin to step foot into a Protestant church, right? I don't know how, it probably would have depended on what church you belonged to as a Protestant. Might have seemed like going to the heretics, and actually even in Minnesota, the language of papists, which means people who follow the Pope. And in you'll see I have a slide of John F. Kennedy here. Before really the Catholics were integrated into the population in Minnesota, it really was very, I would say, inimical. We were almost seen as enemies to Protestantism, and that this was done before he was elected, John F. Kennedy. Again, depending on your age, I don't remember this. This was a year before I was born. John F. Kennedy spoke to Protestant ministers in Houston, and he was kind of giving an apology for or maybe a defense of his Catholic faith, because many Protestants at the time, including in Minnesota, as I've read sources from the 19th century in particular, thought that John F. Kennedy was kind of like an emissary of the Pope who would come, take over the country, and then make everybody Catholic and we'd be all under papal rule. And so one of the things that happens here in Houston, he says that I am going to be president. I am a Roman Catholic, but I will not be the Roman Catholic president. I'm not here as an ambassador of the Vatican. I just happen to be a Roman Catholic. He was actually the second candidate to run for the presidency. Al Smith, a New Yorker, lost the election in, I think it was 1928. Just check my time. Okay. This is the block that I was talking about from the first slide. So we looked at the St. John the Baptist and the 1879 on the original church. This piece of it is, these are Greek letters, which I'll get to in just a second. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the church just before Vatican II. And I said Vatican II was 1962 to 65. At that time, literally from the 5th century until the 20th century, all Catholic, not just Catholic rituals, but even Catholic teaching. I actually went to a college where some of my classes, my moral theology, for example, was taught in Latin, and the professors would speak to one another in Latin. This is in the late 70s, so it was after Vatican II, but because priests at the time really had this common language of Latin, it was used in some of my classes even as late as the 1970s. But at the time when, and this is why the new Abbey Church is not just stellar in terms of its architecture, but it was groundbreaking theology. And one of the reasons is that Jesus was a Jew. The rituals of his time would have been in Hebrew. He spoke Aramaic. Greek is the language of the New Testament. And then Latin came on later. Actually, in the 3rd or 4th century, the faith in Europe started to shift from Greek to Latin. But between the 4th century and literally the 20th century, all Roman Catholic rituals were done in Latin. So when I mention that in relation to the words here, because these are in Greek words. And so I think that the Abbey was kind of groundbreaking. Even before Vatican II, it was already starting to retrieve the ancient sources. It wasn't just using like the Latin of I am the way, the truth, and the life in the Great Hall. It's actually saying there's an earlier source than the Latin, and that's the ancient Greek. All right? And so the two words here, this is the vertical word is the word phos. That first letter is actually a PH in English, O and S. You remember this from in the Great Hall, the last letter of Jesus and the last letter of Christos. And so this means light. And so it would be going back to the Gospel of John, right, where Jesus says, I am the light of the world. This is the word that is in the New Testament for the light. So again, going back to the Gospel of John. And then the other is zoe. You can see the word zoo or zoology. It's life, the study of life. Going to a zoo is looking at a variety of life, right? And actually, just this morning, I added this picture because this was actually in the newspaper this morning. Her name, it's talking about a potential presidential candidate, a half century from now. But the word Zoe there is actually the exact same word as here. You can see the Z, O, and that's the Greek letter for E. And so here, I just thought this was adorable, and so I clipped it into the PowerPoint because it's the same word. Okay. So, all right. The other I think think piece of art that the brother who did the mural in the Great Hall is one that's I think it's huge, but almost nobody sees it, which is on the ceiling. Does anybody know this? Okay, some of you are nodding, so you are familiar with this. Clement Frischhoff, the Abbey monk who did the paintings in the Great Hall, he also did other paintings around the campus, both inside the cloister of the Abbey and elsewhere. And one of the ones that I think is just wonderful is this zodiac. So paganism would be people who believed in God being revealed in nature, did not believe in Christ, and there was a battle between pagans and Christians in ancient Christianity. In the beginning, church fathers really condemned the use of the zodiac. They thought it was kind of like looking in the crystal ball. Again, the kind of Da Vinci Code theology of like all these symbols and so on. But starting in about the 4th century, I think the bishops thought, well, if we can't beat them, let's just adopt them. And so they started actually using the zodiac in Christian theology. So I'll come back to that in a second. I just want to talk about, this is one of the fathers of the church who was condemning the zodiac, okay? St. Augustine, you can see his Latin name, Augustinus. It's a beautiful window if you're, actually I have a picture of Tracy's office here. So Tracy Burr's office, or where the student worker is down here. And the window of St. Augustine is just between those arches, okay? So going back to Augustine, here, I just put the text that's on this window where the bird is whispering into his ear. You have made us for yourself, O Lord. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. And the last part of that is actually in the window. My picture of it didn't turn out so clear, so it's hard to see that. But Augustine, because he had been born and raised as a pagan, he wrote one of the first autobiographies ever called The Confessions of St. Augustine. Augustine had been raised a pagan, and because of that, he thought paganism was evil and sinful, and so he condemned the use of the zodiac in his own writing. But fortunately, at the same time, there were other fathers of the church, and one of them, I have a little sermon, a couple excerpts from his sermon here, and I just wanted to go back to the zodiac as I read a little bit from this sermon of when I was at Notre Dame, my dissertation, this is, these dissertations are always on very specific topics. My dissertation was on Northern Italian calendars between 350 and 450 AD, if you could believe it. 300 pages on the calendar in Northern Italy between 350 and 450, right? But there was one of these bishops who was favorable about the zodiac, was one of these bishops in Northern Italy, and his name was Zeno of Verona. And Zeno of Verona starts with Aries. You can see up at the top, starts with Aries. And I just took one little, what I would ask you to do is, as I mentioned these few phrases from do we have any Aries here? 1, 2, okay, good. Very good, Kathy. Terrific. So he says about Aries, he says, first, under Aries, it's not the ram, but the Lamb of God, right? And he says that the Lamb of God provides the wool for baptism, the white wool. If any of you have been baptized, you were probably clothed in a white garment afterwards. And so he says, Aries provides the wool for the white garment of baptism. He says, if you are not admonished by Taurus, right? Any Taurus? Good. You can see the bull over here. He says, if you are not admonished by Taurus with his muscular neck, his menacing face, or his fierce horns, you will be delighted in the gentle and calm calf. Right? And next, do we have any Gemini? Yeah. So he interprets Gemini as being the Old and the New Testament. So you can kind of see it's a little sleight of hand. He's saying, oh, we've got some twins here. Oh, we can use the Old Testament and New Testament there. He does that actually even with Pisces. He talks about the water and the word, I think, as the two fish of Pisces. Right? And actually, as he moves around, he gets more negative. The worst he is, if any of you, is anybody either a Capricorn? Yeah. Sagittarius? Yeah, so even when he's talking about Cancer, he says, even if you go barefoot through the crabs and the scorpions, actually if you're Scorpio, so he starts out very positive, but I think he's starting to cast around looking for reasons for how to interpret the zodiac and such. The best one that he has actually is here, is Aquarius. The waters in it, good. Okay. So he says that, of course, he says that Aquarius are the waters of baptism. He also has a pretty, so for the Archer, which is Sagittarius, and then this is supposed to be a goat. Doesn't look so much like a goat to me. I've never seen a goat with such horns. And then the Libra is the balance between the Jews and the Gentiles. Any Libras? A couple. And how about Virgo? Yeah, so that's the Virgin Mary, which is not a big surprise. I'm not sure if I covered all of them. But what I mostly wanted to see is how Christian theology evolves, right? There are certain things which at some point might be condemned very vigorously, and they're saying, well, we're not really winning this battle. Let's find a way to kind of adopt this into the church. And just to go back to if you look at this, the X here, And this is what looks like a P. If I could, let me see how quickly I can get to it. The one in the Great Hall. Yeah, so on the right side, the word Christ, you see the X, which is the first two letters. The X in Greek is two letters in English, the C and the H. And this has the S at the end of the word Christos, but the one here, the one on the zodiac, the R is actually, or the P in Greek is an R. I know this sounds very confusing, but the word Christ in Greek starts with X, P, and it's actually the letters C, H, R. Okay? And then the other is the alpha and the omega, which when we say, oh, everything from A to Z, well, there was no Z at the end of the alphabet in Greek, but there was an omega. So what he's basically doing here is taking, or I should say Zeno of Verona, and I trust that Brother Clement in the Abbey by adopting the zodiac and putting it with Christ in the middle. And the book of Revelation speaks of Jesus as the Alpha and the Omega, right? And he's putting these pieces together in order to bring people on board. I lived during my other sabbatical, I've had two, I lived in Argentina for a year, and when I would open up the daily paper, they would have, on one side of the front page, they would have Mass times, and on the other side, they would have the zodiac. And so I kind of thought of that as being this kind of like where you take the Christian stuff and the pagan stuff and you put it all together. On the front page, I used to get a different newspaper every day because they had so many papers. One of them, one day a week, had knitting instructions, so I didn't really like the paper, but I wanted to get the free knitting instruction. But the more conservative political paper had the Mass Times and the Zodiac on the front page. So this Zodiac in the ceiling is right outside the health center, so that if you haven't seen it and you're walking in the quad toward the Abbey Church, if you look up on the ceiling, you'll find that the mural. Any questions on that? All right. So this I put Augustine in here, and actually in the Great Hall, Augustine is the first window to the left. There are 4 of them there. And the next one over from him is St. Ambrose, who is also one of the Northern Italians Ambrose baptized Augustine. Augustine and his mother were traveling in Northern Italy. And so Bishop Ambrose is the one who baptized Augustine. And I know more about these 2 men than any healthy person should. And so I can't help myself by mentioning them favorably. All right, and then the last is this is a Byzantine representation of the same thing. You can see Christ in the middle, and you can I had a hard time figuring all of them out, but you can kind of see like the lion and the twins and so on. But I think it's a more colorful version, perhaps a more ancient version. It's from the 16th century, and it's from a monastery in Greece today. And so it did become common decoration. I can't say it was omnipresent. You don't find it everywhere, but it was something that came into the tradition, and probably in places where the zodiac was common. All right. The one other piece. I mentioned this one. That this is the St. Augustine window outside of Tracy Burr's office. All right. Let me just pick up these the few as we come to a close. I just want to mention. This and David Paul, where's the Kiro one? Remember? I don't know what. Right here. Oh, terrific! Great. Terrific! Great. So I just want to mention I did talk about the oldest of these, which is the St. John the Baptist to the right of and then the foundation date. Okay. The second one that I rubbed, and I mostly want to invite you to do the same for your own office, is this, the Phos for light and the Zoe for life. And if you go into the Abbey Church, as soon as you go in, make a sharp left, there's a cement stairway, and you'll see this, and it's the one that, it's literally, I love this from a Catholic point of view, that you would literally be touching the stone that was in the hands of I don't know if it's the bishop or the abbot in this picture, right? So this literally, when I rubbed this stone, it was literally this very stone that was put in before Vatican II. And then on the outside of the church, I haven't mentioned this, but in the Abbey Church, this. So on the new church, you see the IC to Jesus' right hand and the XC to his left hand. They transferred that same inscription of Jesus Christ without the picture, but on the outside of the Abbey Church. On the inside, you'll see the Phos and Zoe, and then on the outside, you see the date 1958. And so that's why the Abbey Church is so significant, because of its emphasis on baptism, because of the big, huge baptismal font. Literally, Tracy Burr's office was where the baptismal font was before. If you happen to ever go into Tracy's office, you'll see Noah's Ark, the baptism of Jesus, and I think the baptismal font stood right in the middle of her office. And then when the new Abbey Church was built, baptism was, especially adult baptism, was coming back into the Catholic Church, no longer only baptizing infants, but baptizing adults. And that's why the baptismal font in the Abbey Church, with John the Baptist, right, John the Baptizer standing right next to it. And so the language that was used not only was moving from the Latin of the Catholic tradition back to the Greek of the New Testament, but it was also starting to put baptism back in its rightful place as the start of the sacraments, where for many, many centuries, especially when infants only were baptized, the Eucharist kind of stood at the primary place. But at Vatican II, one of the big changes was to start to see baptism getting back front and center. And the Abbey Church literally was a forerunner in that. Okay, I'm laughing about the forerunner. I was asked my husband about this because does anybody own a Forerunner car? No, okay, but literally on the back of a car when you see Forerunner, that means John the Baptist, literally. He was the forerunner to Christ. It said, I'm not worthy to untie his sandals. So when I look at the representation of John the Baptist in the Abbey Church, and then when I see one of these, is it a Toyota 4Runner? Yeah, I think of John the Baptist when I see that car. Anyway, I did ask Chick and David Paul to let you know where these rubbings and the charcoal, they ordered them from a site that does these cemetery inscriptions. And so they said that they would make them available to you, and we'll also have them when we do the walking tour of these sites. There was one other piece of there are other things on the tour that we'll look at, but I didn't want to be too overwhelming with with information. Especially my students get very, I can't say disappointed, but they get very frustrated because I'm always using Latin and Greek in my classes. And so sometimes it can be a tidal wave of non-English stuff that I'm throwing at them. And so that's why I excluded one piece of the presentation, but we will cover that when we do the walking tour. All right. As you can tell, I am from the East Coast and I tend to talk very fast. And my student review said not only did I talk fast, but I also talked way too close. I didn't leave the requisite Minnesota distance between me and them. And so I didn't give as many pauses for questions. Are there any things that I covered that you would have questions about?
What's the other one you have in your hand?
Oh, actually, great, thank you. So on the, let me find it in the present. So literally right now, along this wall, it's the wooden wall that goes around, if the altar isn't there, right? The wooden wall. These are the same letters, the first letter of the name Christ and the second letter of the name Christ. And so if you don't want to be outside Tracy's office with the big sheet of paper, you could just grab this, maybe a 12 by 12 piece. And there are about 24 of these. It's called a key. This is called a key, and this is called a row. And it's literally the symbol for Christ, or it's an abbreviation for the word Christ. And it is related politically to when the empire, the Roman Empire, became Christian. You may have heard of Constantine. He was the first Christian emperor. And the reason he made the empire Christian was because he saw the symbol up in the sky. And so in the basilica form of the Great Hall, there are 24 of these around the apse. And so you could just take this small piece with the charcoal and rub one to hang in your office if you wanted. It's smaller than these are. It's not perhaps as cryptic, but it's a little easier to manage because it's at eye level and you don't have to get down on the ground for that. So, any other?
What's the significance of there being 24 of those?
Actually, I wish I knew that. I do know it's, as far as the angels and the lambs that are up there, the numbers are from the book of Revelation. But the 24 might simply be because the wood was already, there were 24 panels and they just repeated them. But that's a guess. I'm not really sure. There's nothing in the gospel that I think of in particular, or in the Bible even, that would make 24. And I'm not even sure I'm correct on that number. There's just a slew of them with the door in the middle. So I'm not sure if there's a numerical significance in the same way that there is with the lambs and the angels on the wall, which come from the book of Revelation. So, yeah.
I just noticed the other week that the stained glass windows, there's females on one side and the males, saints on the other side. Can you speak about that? Is that unusual to even have the female saints in a male institution? Or?
I thought at some point they had actually covered up some of the windows, but when I was in preparing for today, I looked at some of the history books, and the two that are there, there's an Alexius, and that was the name of one of the abbots in the monastery before, and then St. Bernard, who was a Trappist monk. He's the other one that's visible, and mostly for his great spirituality, Bernard is up there. So he was not a Benedictine. He was kind of his community was an offshoot of the Benedictines, but they're there. But there weren't like 4 on the other side and 4 on this side, and 2 of them got lost, at least as far as my research showed. Alexius and Bernard are the other 2, but there weren't 2 that got rubbed out. So.
Martin, actually, to that point, though, was it typical to have 5 Benedictine women saints opposite 5 Benedictine men saints in an abbey church?
Yeah, so in the walking tour, I don't want to be like an advertisement here, but there's that Old Testament window, and there are Benedictine men. There are 5 Benedictine men with Benedict in the center. And then on the New Testament side, there are 5 women, and Benedict's twin sister, Scholastica, is in the middle. And then there are 2 Benedictine women to the left and 2 Benedictine women to the right. So they're all, one of them, actually the very right male window is St. Gregory the Great, who wasn't Benedictine but wrote the life of Benedict, and so he's there represented. And then we will also, I'm going to try to get Life Safety to give me the key so we can get up into the choir loft, because there's the Old Testament window on one side, there's the New Testament window on the other side, and then up in the choir loft, there's a Benedict window, and it has some really cool symbols in it. So I'm hoping that I can get Life Safety to let us in when we're doing the walking tours, so we can see the Benedict window in addition to the Old Testament and New Testament. Yeah, and I don't know if we'll do too much detail because there would be a lot of saints in that, but there's Alexius, Bernard, and then there are the 5 Benedictine women on that side, and then on this side there's St. Jerome, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Ambrose, St. Augustine, and then 5 Benedictine men under that Old Testament window. Good. Terrific. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Martin. Chuck, she says, I won't be able to live that down. She said to make 2 short announcements. One is that you can register for that last tour on the Benedictine Institute website at the bottom of the page. And there are still some desserts to take with you before you leave. There was one other one? Can't think of anything else. Yeah. Oh, that's it. I just can't live it down. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Martin.